Putin's war of conquest is failing. Russia's military has lost half its territory it once occupied. Young, talented Russians are fleeing by the tens of thousands, not wanting to come back to Russia. Not just fleeing from the military, fleeing from Russia itself.
On behalf of all Ukrainians, happy Veterans Day and thank you for your service. For almost 250 years, the men and women of the United States Armed Forces have prevailed against tyranny, often against great odds. Your example inspires Ukrainians today to fight back against Russian tyranny. Special thanks to the many American veterans who have volunteered to fight in Ukraine, and to the American people for the amazing support you have given Ukraine. With your help, we have stunned the world and are pushing Russian forces back. Victory will be ours. God bless America and Slava Ukraini!
Доброго вечора, ми з України.
Welcome. This is the Chug Life podcast, and this is our second episode on the Ukrainian state's fight for survival against the Russians. Today we'll be discussing a lot of events that include massacres, genocide. So if you are below 18, this podcast unfortunately is not for you, and you should not be listening. If you are above the age of 18, please continue. Enjoy. This episode is going to be going over a lot of events. Currently, there is a large revolution happening in Georgia as a result of the fight in Ukraine. I believe it's directly linked, honestly. A lot of the stuff that happened in Ukraine over the last couple of months has really pushed a lot of people to just finally push the Russians out. And the Kazakhs were the first to do it. They are currently, I think they finally kicked out like the last full peacekeeping force from Russia. And Georgia is now doing the same thing. But the fight in Georgia is to a different level than what the Kazakhs had to deal with, because Georgians don't have a military force. And unfortunately for the Georgian people, they don't really have a government that's too interested in not, just doing elections, and they don't really care about listening to the people. So it's becoming a huge issue. There's tons of riots, there's tons of protests, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of violence. So this podcast is going to be talking about all of the events that we kind of left off that we didn't talk about, as well as some of the events that are coming out of all of this tension and all of this chaos in Europe. And I, excuse me, the time that has been lapsed between the first episode has allowed for a lot to happen. And honestly, a lot more than I would have liked, if I'm being really honest about this. I had initially assumed that Russia would continue their static warfare, lines wouldn't shift, and there wouldn't be continued assaults into Ukrainian held territory, causing large, just innumerable amounts of damage to Russia. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of day-to-day losses that Russia can put up with. And they can continue to do that. They may lose hundreds of men. They may even lose 1,000 men a day. And they'll just go right back out and lose 1,000 men tomorrow. And this is, of course, sector by sector. We're talking about front lines for cities that are enduring these bigger battles. We can't really compute what the smaller battles totals are. The quote unquote smaller battles, of course. There is no small battle. This is all to a scale that the human mind can't comprehend. I'll be honest with you. The brutality that the Ukrainians are currently facing is on a scale the likes of the world has never seen. And it allows for a reassessment of what we think we should be doing and how far we should support. Having glide bombs going into Ukrainian cities every day, hitting apartment blocks, hitting parking lots and busy malls, hitting schools and intersections in large cities, because Ukrainians simply can't keep up with hundreds of missiles and glide bombs. It's unimaginable. And I'd go as far to say that this goes way, way further than anything any other nation has ever done. Not only in terms of the scale of the fuck-ups, but just in the scale of the movement of troops, the equipment, the conscription services. It's on a level that no, I don't think anybody could really keep up with it. And I don't think that, sure, we could all absolutely argue that the U.S. could do it, and that most Western powers would be able to put up, a equipment amount that's similar to Russia's, which is something like 500,000 pieces of equipment. And that's used, we're talking about between missiles, bombs, we're talking about tanks, we're talking about helicopters, everything. Which is a ridiculously sizable amount of stuff. You have to maintain all of this after you can get it working in the first place, because most of this is probably going to be Soviet stocks. And that's currently what Russia's dipping into. So, this tangent is meant to kind of encapsulate the utter scale of the task of laying this out on a somewhat understandable basis. So, leading from our first episode, what we're going to do today is talk about the first days of the invasion. And specifically, we're going to talk about how you can just absolutely fuck up such a seemingly, easy task from what all the major critics and all of the war hawks were saying. Being literally at Kyiv's door, you invade with all of this equipment, you rush all of this shit up to Kyiv. You have this huge attack at the Battle of Hostomel Airport. And you just, as some would say, fumble the bag. They brought parade equipment to a major paradrop operation. And they thought they'd get away with it. That shows you really how naive Russian high command was about this. There's so many reports about, we didn't even know we were going to Kyiv until last night, this morning when we crossed the border. And it's not like any of these guys had any preparation about this event aside from they just had done all of these military drills, because that's really where this all starts, always. Hey, just so happens, dude, I gotta do this military drill on our border. Do you mind if I park 500,000 guys on our border for a couple of weeks? I hope you don't mind. You've got Poland over here fucking shitting, just shitting. It's so fucking terrified of the absolute fact that now they're going to have to put all of this money and all this attention, even more than they already have been doing, into defense. This whole fucking thing, by the way, is being telegraphed, essentially, by the U.S. intelligence. You're going, hey, dude, they're going to invade. It's probably going to happen from here. We think they're going to try and do this. And there's absolutely no way that anybody could have foreseen this. Don't get me wrong. There's no fault in anybody, especially folks in Ukraine that were hoping to God that their neighbor wouldn't come over and fucking kill them. These are cousins, dude. Like the relationships from some of the stories I've heard is truly heartbreaking. It's like calling your aunt and finding out your cousin's gonna be coming over in a fucking tank, try and blow your fucking friends to smithereens. Can you imagine being the Ukrainian soldier that ends up finding one of his relatives in a hunting raid or something for POWs in the trenches? It's absolutely mind-blowing thought process to decide to do this. So nobody ever expected this, aside from, of course, U.S. intelligence out here being spooks. So they do their job. Nobody believes them. And as a result of that, you have little to no resistance essentially all the way up to Kyiv. And so, of course, the Russians springboard out of all of these areas that aren't Donetsk and Luhansk. These are essentially end up becoming the two main static lines because they've been putting up defenses for years now. So they do have a lot of movement that ends up happening. That front line trades hands so many times. But the Ukrainians always manage to go back and reestablish that same front. But my main interest points today will be in the more northern part. And the reason why is because this was aided by Belarus, which is another belligerent to this war. And Belarus specifically is one of those states that is very open to having Russian nukes on their planes and on their land. They're very open to allowing Russians coming back and forth to go and pillage and rape in Ukraine. And they're very open to having a lot of these military drills as well, which, as you can see, have been used previously by Russia to stage more troops in that area, under the guise of, hey, we're just training, don't worry about this. But it doesn't stop anybody else from doing their due diligence. So that's really the good thing about this. So all of these spy agencies are going to continue doing their work. The intelligence committee, that they're hopefully going to make good decisions in regards to U.S. matters to tell other nations what's going on. And hopefully now in the future, folks will, take that more seriously. And anyhow, so Russians have all of these dumb ideas that they're going to have this really beautiful and, almost brotherly reception when they come into Ukraine. And immediately they find out that Ukrainians don't want them on their land. And they deal with tons of ambushes. They deal with tons of heavy battles. And one of the heaviest battles ends up being in Bucha and Irpin. And these suburbs end up leading into Kyiv that see some of the most brutal fightings because convoys, just huge stacks upon stacks of trucks and all of this shit that they brought in because they thought that they would be having a nice fun little parade. They didn't plan to have to do hard urban warfare. A lot of these guys I imagine didn't even plan that they were going to war. I mean, granted, they just found out that morning. It's even worse that you find out you're going to kill your cousin. A lot of this stuff ends up being just nothing in terms of how Russian propaganda feeds it to people. Because Bucha ends up seeing some of the greatest genocide seen in Ukraine to date. And it's synonymous with a lot of other atrocities that happen on a daily in Ukraine. We're talking about thousands of corpses, unmarked graves, burnt bodies, mutilation, all of that stuff. There's videos of a Ukrainian guy on a bicycle getting mowed down by a 30 millimeter from a BTR. These guys just watched them come down the street. They were just sitting in their little tin can, 6-wheeled piece of shit. Might be 8-wheeled, I don't know. Can't remember right now, but no difference. Russians committed crimes that are unspeakable, but they need to be spoken about Because in Irpin, the town's over on their continued retreat away from Kyiv after they got their ass handed to them. They did the same things. They continued committing atrocities all the way back to the current borders today. They continue committing atrocities today in Vovchansk today. Before I recorded this, I saw this video from an overhead drone from when the Russians retreated after they got their asses handed to them trying to enter the city of Vovchansk. It's just civilian bodies littered everywhere. And it's absolutely unimaginable to think of the ones that we don't see. And to think of the actions of the troops that are in areas that this video doesn't get out from. There's a lot of units that can afford to get drones, and there's a lot of units that can afford to have great social media campaigns. But it is very worrying to think about the places that aren't having, these really good videos and really powerful imagery coming out of them. I worry about that sometimes. But that's just one of the symptoms of this whole thing, is constantly worrying. But it is nothing compared to what the Ukrainian people are currently dealing with. And before we continue, I do want to encourage all of you to go and check out United 24. You can find them on any social media, and you should go and check them out. If you like it, donate them. That money goes straight into helping civilian and military needs. They specify even further, but I stand for everything those guys stand for, and they are a bright light in this world in a really, really shitty situation. So go check them out. And anyways, so as a result of all of these events, the world ended up crying out for Ukraine to receive missile anti-air. And this ends up being one of the biggest changes for Ukraine. And the means that they can defend from cruise missiles, they can defend from sometimes other bombers and things that try to come into Ukraine and attack. So this ends up coming to not only a big standstill in the war, because you have to kind of always deal with missile stocks and whether you have enough missiles, whether you want to engage this, whether you want to have other things engage that. Not everything is going to be a priority for that missile system. So there's only specific things that you're going to want to engage with that. And then you have a lot of the trouble of, well, should we just engage that? This is also just you're defending lives. So there's a good amount of reasoning behind the Ukrainians being very free in how they employ the use of AIM-120s and all of these high value missiles from the Patriot systems. It's I think very reasonable to want to use any means that you can to defend your cities, because at the end of the day, a fire is a fire. The bomb is a bomb, and that missile, that warhead, that HE explosive, it's going to do the damage regardless of the size of the missile or the warhead delivery system, the plane bringing it. You should, I believe, try to bring it down regardless of the means of the delivery. So I think that's very righteous, and that leads you to another issue stemming from stocks, is that the more that you sit the more you're going to run into an issue of having drones and all of these very large loitering munitions that end up getting more and more range, that they're going to find you. And so that's why you start seeing a lot of systems get hit. As the front line can move, and as some larger systems may be brought in, some more quality systems can be brought in, then you have all of these issues where you're going to have to continuously pull your systems back, your very expensive systems, So, but the good thing is that Ukraine is really good at making decoys and employing those decoys, and that's something that you see a lot through a lot of the footage that they release, is that they have tons of these things in the same area, and they all look very good, and it's a very realistic setup as well. And they've sometimes gotten folks on the more Western side of the argument that like these systems fooled and thinking that it was a proper destruction or whatever. And it's really cool to see. But that issue in itself is going to end up giving Ukraine so much more leeway to be able to employ counter battery and find a lot of these systems. And that's also what happens because of HIMARS and a lot of these systems that we continue giving them. French systems, British systems, you have the Scalp, you have Storm Shadow. A lot of these things end up just having a huge effect on the battlefield. And it's such an effect that it not only does it change the morale to an absolutely astronomical effect, seeing that ammunition dump in the distance get blown to smithereens, but you're also going to be having the huge effect of now they have to reorganize everything because this whole area is obviously it's compromised. We can't be here, so there's definitely eyes here. Something is definitely going on in somewhere in this area that we don't really know if we can stay here safely. And so not only can you give yourselves a lot of flexibility in how you can maneuver, but you're also going to put the enemy in a lot of strain. And it's a very stressful situation, I can imagine, to have that happen. Have your ammunition depot get blown up, or you hear the troops that are behind you getting flanked, so to speak. Your flank is getting flanked, type situation. So that type of surprise brings a whole other element to having these type of static battles, and you're not really going to have a lot more done if the area is so iffy to operate in. So that's what you see in Ukraine is a lot of static warfare that eventually is only brought in by 5 to 20 guys per day trying to push in. And I say static warfare in the sense that there isn't big movements in the majority of the Ukrainian front lines, which is why you're not going to see a lot of headlines, so to speak, about it, because there's only going to be concentrated actions in only concentrated areas. And that's why you see all of these tanks being lost in, the same 5 miles, because it's the same group trying to come from the same area. And the big thing that you're starting to see from a lot of the troops is that they'll send little groups out in hopes that having little groups is going to make them more successful in staying alive when they get deeper in, because usually they get picked apart by artillery. So they think, well, if we send small groups in, the Ukrainians aren't going to send artillery. They're not going to waste it. Wrong. Ukrainians have a lot of drones, and they have a lot of stuff that they can send your way before they decide to send some artillery or missiles your way. And it's beautiful to see how Western equipment can make such a huge difference, because it's not only incredibly accurate the way that this battery and a lot of their systems really can fire, but HIMARS specifically is absolutely just catastrophic on the field. And I think I've only seen it used like once on a tank, but man, I'd really love to see that more, because it's beautiful. The tungsten balls and, all of the fragmentation effects, you can really just put a whole grid square out of action and not even have fire and a lot of the destruction that you would from a big unitary warhead. The big bombs. We're talking about, think of thousands of tungsten balls just flying in every possible direction you can imagine, from a space as big as a football field, just huge, or a baseball field depending where you're from, even bigger. And the destruction can just absolutely fuck up anything that has an engine, anything that needs cylinders. It's gone. Don't even bother trying it. Can't repair it. It's impossible. So these types of things are really unique because they allow Ukraine to really punch above its weight and continue to stave off the mass horde of Russians trying to take Ukrainian cities. And the reason why I wanted to talk about HIMARS more is because HIMARS has a huge effect on how the Russian has had to position everything, because they're terrified of this weapon. It's incredibly accurate. It has incredible distance. It can do so much damage, and there's nothing really that can stop it. There's been some reports from Russians that the S-400 or the S-500 have shot it down. I think it's fucking bullshit. That's just me, though. There hasn't really been any evidence. A lot of the stuff that they've came out has been booster packs. We see a warhead, dude, we'll talk. Whatever. That's you Ukrainians have been successful in shooting down every type of Russian type made weapon that flies. They can shoot down bombs if they feel like it, but they don't. I don't think that's something that they've been doing. They just try to go after the fighter or the bomber craft, whatever they can. That's dropping down. But aside from all of these equipments, the Ukrainians themselves have been developing a lot of weapons, specifically in the drone field, and this is leading to some of the biggest developments in human history, with how drones are developed, with how drones are used, with how they're able to work in the battlefield and transmit data. In terms of, we're talking about cheap made drones, all right? This is, all stuff that our drones can do, no problem. But these drones, we're talking about 1/100th of the production cost. So it's night and day. We're talking about extremely cheap stuff. It can be extremely effective, and it can be made en masse. This is Timmy's drone production factory. All right. And Timmy is getting paid by the Ukrainian state because Timmy has done some drone work in the past. And he's very good at working with DJIs. He's very good at producing his own offshoot of DJI drones. He's got fins, he's got the bodies, he's got a lot of the motors, he's got a good amount of stuff, but really what he's going to need is going to figure out how to get a drone production facility going. So he turns to funding campaigns And one of the main reasons why I love United 24 is Timmy, guys like Timmy, because Timmy isn't real. Guys like Timmy can get paid by these organizations from me and from people like you. So if you'd like to, again, make a difference in a lot of people's lives, go and donate to these guys or check them out. Anyhow, so drones are becoming a huge game changer. And the reason why is because drones eventually will lead to the capability of releasing munitions like mines and big, large munitions. And the reason why this is special, in my opinion, is because this allows for a lot of maneuverability in the field, in my opinion. It not only gives you a whole other avenue for bringing destruction to the enemies, but it also allows you a whole other avenue for setting defensive traps and setting defensive positions and setting mines and kind of traps, so to speak, as a whole, without putting a human being at risk. So that's really something that I think is super special, because we've had ground-based drones that can do this. We currently do have ground-based drones that can do this, but I think aerial is going to be such a different field, and having low-cost aerial drones is going to be such a whole different avenue for how warfare will be conducted, that it's important for nations to develop it. And I'm glad that we'll have Ukraine on our side to be able to find a way how to stop these things. And we're currently working on that, which is very great, because drones are fucking scary, dude. Like, in Ukraine currently, they're testing these drones that can shoot shotguns, which is fucking horrifying, dude. Like, that's man-made horrors beyond my comprehension. Like, I'm sure at some point the Geneva Conventions will be amended for this shit. No doubt about it. Like, I immediately get some, memories of learning about in World War One, when the first shotgun came out. That was a slam fire shotgun, I believe. They tried to go to the Geneva Conventions to get that gun banned, and everybody just told them to fuck off. So I think that's, it's never gonna work, but it's definitely gonna happen. So aside from all of these things, the reason why events like Hostomel and Bucha and Irpin, all of these events end up leading to huge Russian failures, is because Ukrainian innovation ends up going to a completely different scale. And they end up using some of the most brilliant tactics with the most unbelievable strokes of luck and just, God's hand that anyone could ever imagine. And they end up pushing the Russians back, and the Russians end up announcing that, we'll do our goodwill gesture, we're going to pull out, And they commit all these atrocities as they leave. And all of these cities have genocide and mass ethnic cleansing attempts connected to them. Because all of these cities had resistance. All of these cities ended up seeing tons of troops attempt to break out, and a lot of these cities ended up eventually being encircled at points. There was a lot of Mariupols that ended up happening. And over the course of a lot of these battles, a lot of prisoners of war were taken by Russia. You have guys like Sean Pinner and Aiden Aslan. A lot of those guys ended up making it out of Russia months after their capture. Changed forever. Entirely. Particularly for me, Sean was entirely different. If you look at photos of him, it's unbelievable. There's a guy I'm reminded of. His name was Mikhailo, I believe. And they beat that man like you wouldn't believe. It's truly unbelievable. The strength in those guys, some to be admired. So Russia has a lot of these events that can be used for internal propaganda purposes to quell a lot of people that are pissed off about how the war is going. Because to this point, it's an absolute shit show. You have the Battle of Hostomel, where they lose dozens upon dozens of airplanes and helicopters and failed assaults. They lose hundreds, if not thousands, of men in that assault. And a lot of that has to be explained to people back home, why we're having such large funeral processings and why all of you guys are getting new Ladas. Oh, by the way, we can't give you a Lada. You're going to have to take some potatoes and some lettuce. That happened, by the way. It's absolutely incredible. You want to be shocked, go and check out some stuff on, you can either Google it, Russian mother receives new Lada, or she thought she would, something like that. And it's just jaw-dropping shit. A lot of this stuff ends up being fed through VKontakte and a lot of these social media and Telegram. And really, Telegram and that's, as far as I understand, the only truly free means of Russian speaking right now. Because censorship is at an all-time high. And a lot of this stuff can really get you put in prison, and it can get you killed. So, that's the return of Russia to the Soviet times has never been more real. This is it. This is probably as good as it'll get for Russia and as bad as it'll get for Ukraine. And the reality of the situation today is that Russians are getting their teeth punched in everywhere. They constantly try to make assaults because a couple of weeks ago, a Victory Day was held in Russia, as is done every year. So after they have elections and after Victory Day, then they can send everybody to the slaughter, to the killing fields of Ukraine. This whole war has been a repetition of Chechnya over and over and over and over. But the differences are unreal, of course. Don't get me wrong. But in terms of the brutality and in terms of just how obscene the fights are, you're seeing dozens of T-64s and T-55s, tanks that haven't been seen in decades, rolling across the Ukrainian steppes, being hit by drones, being hit by javelins, being bombarded by mortars, artillery, and then getting sent to the moon in a catastrophic detonation. The turret explodes directly up And you can't even see it on the drone operator's video anymore. It goes so high. You could probably, there should be nobody in the area flying when this thing goes off, because you'll probably get hit by it. It's, man, Russian tanks really love the sky, dude. I think about that a lot. And one of the biggest changes that's come out of Western aid, of course, has been tanks, and has been the delivery of a lot of these new Toad type missile systems like the Bradleys. You know, these things have been game changers, dude. And the best thing for Ukrainians as well is becoming the 50 cals. They love those things. The M2 Browning is probably that John Browning is going to end up having a statue in Ukraine. Just bet me on that. All right. The strikers are making a huge difference. And really, it's a shame that a lot of these vehicles hadn't come earlier. That's always my main thought, you know. This is really the reason this whole episode, this series, everything is done, is so we can continue support for Ukraine and give them everything they need, man. We won't need this shit for a while. Just give them everything they need. And in continuation of our conversation about Mariupol, the reason that this battle ends up being a huge failure for Russia, even though they end up taking Mariupol, is they end up having to rebuild the city afterward. And as far as I'm aware, this is the first and only time that they've actually rebuilt the city after they've destroyed it. Usually they just leave it destroyed and they get their teeth beat in, they lose the city the day afterward. But Ukraine hasn't been able to liberate Mariupol yet, which is very painful for me, because I remember the day it fell. And the Battle of Mariupol itself was horrible, and I can't really describe to the extent of the horrors that I saw. But what I can tell you guys is that what the Ukrainian people endure, nobody should have to endure. And it is a cause that I am wholly behind, and I will be behind till the day I die. Because Mariupol had everything you can imagine dropped on it. The Azovstal steel plant had everything you could imagine dropped on it, from white phosphorus to incendiary munitions to big Fab 5000s to every drone, every tank, every BMP main gun, every coaxial, everything you can imagine in the area that could have hit that building, hit it. And guys like Aiden Aslin were in there. They ended up having to try to retreat from these areas, and heroes came in choppers to try and escort guys out, get the wounded out. Some lost their lives. Those helicopter transports are stuff of the legend. Stuff for history books. Those missions are stuff that we would give Medal of Honors for, and I'm sure those guys got Medal of Honors posthumously, and the ones who survived. But the toll that has been brought on the Ukrainian state is one that you can't really take a cost for. There isn't a single figure that will be enough. There isn't a single treaty. There isn't anything that I imagine that will be enough, aside from Putin being completely out of power and a full restoration of the Ukrainian lands. I can't really imagine that Russia will ever go back to normal. There is no end in sight for this war, unfortunately. The way that Putin is looking right now, there's no wind down in sight. There's only been escalation. And that escalation is really just, it's brought on by being emboldened by Western states refusing to give more aid. Although recently, in the past few hours as well, there have been more people that have been coming to the front to give aid, including Sweden, who recently decided, as of this morning, that they were going to give $7 billion to Ukraine in military aid, which is absolutely fucking massive, because Swedish equipment is unbelievable. It is out of this world in effectiveness, and really what Ukraine needs is more protective systems for its troops to move to the front and to get troops out of the front. And they need to be having safe ways to rotate troops, I think is the main, the big important thing. So I do think that there's an unbelievable amount of new stuff that is going to be coming to the front. That's including the new jets that Ukraine will get from Denmark. They're going to be getting F-16s, and that's going to be at the end of this month, I believe. They'll be in the air. I do think that these are going to be transformational for Ukraine. They're going to allow Ukraine to punch well above its weight in terms of air defense, and they're going to really make the Russians even more scared to come and do anything in Ukrainian airspace or near it. So I think that the more Ukraine gets, the better off everybody will be, because Russia is just a huge threat to the world, and they can't be trusted with anything. So the reason we're speaking about all of this equipment and stuff is because recently Russia has got his ass beat in Georgia, and they decided they wanted to fight back. And one of the big, oh God, you're so cute. And with Georgia getting its ass, and with Russia getting its ass beat in Georgia, it's kind of given everybody new ideas about what Russian aid looks like and what Russian peacekeeping forces can really do. And this is a huge result from the war, in my opinion, because we know the Russian bear isn't so strong, and there's only so much that he's going to be able to do while he's bogged down in Ukraine. So I think the shackles have finally been broken for the Georgian people, and there's going to be even more of this across the world, because this war is hugely unpopular in Russia. That is some of the things that we've seen in the last month. It's becoming more and more clear to people that this isn't a winning war. Particularly, Ukraine had a lot of incursions in the last couple of months into Belgorod. And specifically in the last month, they have done it to such an effect where they've been able to cause a lot of commotion within civilian life. And that's really one of the big goals. You're not really doing damage to the area with these type of movements, because these are all specifically military type operations. So you are attacking convoys, you are attacking border guards, you were really just ambushing and wanting to get attention to bring more forces to the area. And they did that extremely well, which allowed for a lot more troops and a lot more equipment to be sent to the area, and just to be fed more and more into the cannon fodder. So essentially what Ukraine is trying to do in a lot of these smaller battles that are ongoing in these kind of border incursions that happen, as they happen into Kursk and as they happen into Belgorod, is that they're just trying to pull more forces away from other areas that may be hotter and that may be more contested. So it's beautiful really to see American equipment doing this, because that's what it was made for. And it's, I think, even more beautiful and just ironic, I guess, to see it being done to defend a democracy, and an emerging democracy at that. It is very important for us to stand by our allies, and especially allies that have a huge significance in the means of freedom and in the means of upholding free elections for the people. And the reason why that's important is because there's a lot of states like Russia that enjoy having subversive economies and having subversive means to really pull people away from having good elections, and they end up having a lot of fraudulent shit happen, like how China does their elections, and the same way that Russia does their elections, or Belarus, how they do their elections, all these type of things where it's just straight bullshit. You know, you winning 94% of the votes, yeah, oh fucking K. So I think it's great that Ukraine is not standing up for any of this bullshit. And I think it's great that they continue to beat the shit out of Russia. We should continue funding them. We should give them as many billions and trillions as they like. All of that shit is pennies on the dollar to what it'll cost for us to invade and for us to actively go and put Air Force, Navy, and Army troops into these fields, and to have big operations. And it's the war that we would see come out of this type of involvement would be astronomical, truly. It would include every facet of every field imaginable. Cyber, space, we're talking about ground, sea, air. There would be missiles, there would be ICBMs involved. We're talking about anti-satellite weapons being used. We're talking about satellite weapons being used. The first possible deployments of space weapons to hit ground systems, or movements like that, rod of God type shit. There's a lot of things that we don't know that the DoD has been doing, and terrifying shit at that. We're in the process of currently basically just upgrading all of our nukes, and to make them more safer and, you know, make them better, all of that cool shit. But I find all of this very ironic in the sense that at the same time Russia's getting its ass beat, we are currently and constantly upgrading all of our best shit. Like, it's without a doubt that we are getting stronger and helping Ukraine at the same time. It is just one of the most no-brainer things for me, because this allows us really to just exert our influence to a scale we would have never imagined. And we continuously fumble it. The White House continuously fucks this up. It is unbelievable. They can do way better. They will do way better. Don't get me wrong. The people won't let them do worse. But, for fuck's sake, Jake Sullivan, Jesus Christ, dude. What are you doing? I'm glad we got guys like Blinken to fucking hold it down. Because, man. You know, there's a lot of ways that we can impact Ukraine and their ability to defend themselves to a scale that would be really terrifying for Russia, but we won't do it. And it's not nuclear reasons that we won't do it. It's not any other reason aside from we're just straight fucking scared. You know, you can put complicated reason behind it. Oh, maybe they'll not launch a nuke, or maybe they'll say they'll launch another nuke. I don't fucking know. They do nuclear blackmail every fucking day. All right, it's just a regular fucking Wednesday in Ukraine. That's what it's like to live next to a genocidal neighbor and his fucking clown car of maniacs. Sure, you can have your freedom, but apparently you're going to be left alone to rot against the bear. And I think that's a pretty fucked up day to be a Ukrainian. But it is a beautiful day when you see those F-16s fly over with American AIM-120s dropping GBU-12s, sending every missile system known to man across Russian borders to hit military targets, send missiles into Ukraine on a daily basis. That's what we want. That's what I want, really. Hopefully Ukraine will get that someday soon. Those restrictions are bullshit. So, next episode I will go over some of my favorite events in regards to this war. And what I mean by favorite events, of course, is going to be some of the most hilarious blunders from the Russian army. And boy, oh boy, you've got a lot. So, it's very likely that I will do this next month. And this will be the only episode for the series for this month. So, it's, I've got some shit I've got to do. So, once I'm done with some medical stuff, I'll get back to this fun stuff. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. This is Michael Vega with the Chug Life Podcast. You guys have a good one.